This is The Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonnet. This week it's the two of us, and we're having a conversation about, broadly, our philosophy of design, and even more specifically, how and why we approach the design of a house or a building as a narrative.
We have about 6 points that we covered during this chat. The first one, we are going to talk about living patterns and the purpose of each space, followed by sequences and procession, very important and sometimes overlooked, key moments in a house and a project, but also the cohesiveness of the language, the aesthetics, the materials, the geometry is very important. And the last 2 points will be about kind of thinking of a house as you would think of a song, which sounds very interesting. And of course, the emotional aspect, the emotions, right, that can be felt in design.
Yeah. That sounds good to me.
Sounds exciting. Grab your popcorn and get comfortable.
Sponsors.
My dear fellow architects, do you know the current spend on your budget? Can you forecast your next 6 months of performance? Do you know the status of all of your projects? Have your team hours been effectively allocated? If you struggle to answer these questions quickly and easily, then you need to explore Monograph. Monograph is a performance management platform. It helps you and your firm make better day-to-day decisions and anticipate what's next with powerful forecasts. It's designed by architects for architects. Monograph gives you less obscurity, more visibility, less ambiguity, more clarity, less admin, more design. You have to see it to believe it. Your performance becomes a lot easier to manage because it's no longer hiding from you. Tap the Monograph link in our show notes to see for yourself.
The Second Studio podcast is made possible by support from Autodesk.
Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that help architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire. Autodesk supports the work of the Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders.
The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to contribute to this podcast. Learn more about Autodesk by clicking their link in our show notes. This is The Second Studio with the two of us. Here we go. So today we're going to talk about our design philosophy and how we approach the design of a house or buildings in general, and specifically the idea that designing a house means thinking about it as constructing a narrative. There's about 6 different points to this discussion, but before we get into those points, I do want to kind of answer the question is like, why would you think about designing a house as a narrative? Like, why bother doing that?
Well, I think that's where really our value comes into play, right? There is 2 ways you could design a house. Client comes to us with a program, a question, a problem, and we're bringing a solution. I need a house with 4 rooms, and we give them those 4 rooms, right? Like I check the box.
Right.
Or we actually think as creative, right? And we think beyond those basic needs. Thinking about a house as a narrative makes sense because, you know, when you live in a house, it's a 4-dimension space, right? It exists in like a multitude of senses, and movement is a key aspect of the senses. Thinking about the space as a box that's fixed within 4 walls and a plan view and some elevation and flat material, it's not the right way, to me at least, to approach designing a home.
Yeah.
You could design a house, but like to make it special and to make it unique and to make it for that specific person, I think you have to get into the sensibility, the poetic of the space, the emotion of that space. You know, thinking about like how do you go from one space to another and what happens between that time span, I think is super important.
Yeah, and I think the easy answer to the question is also because that's how the home is experienced.
Yeah.
Right. That's how you live in it. You live in it from a first person perspective, and your eyesight's at, 5.5 feet or whatever, however tall you are, and you move through spaces. That is the reality of the house. So for us as architects and designers, I want to be clear that there's a lot of different ways that we understand the design of a home as we're doing it. There's different like kind of lenses through which we see the house. And some of them correspond specifically to tools and drawing. So like say the floor plan drawing provides a certain way of understanding the house. The site plan has a certain value that it brings in their tool set to understanding the entire property. And there's other things too, like the program meaning the functions or the activities that take place within the house too. And so programming the house is also very important. But it could easily be the case where those tools, sometimes they tend to be more on the analytical side, like it's a really kind of big picture analytical to see how the whole thing is shaping. And of course, we also think about the house in terms of like the budget, the schedule, and all those things, and the construction technology, how it gets built, right? The construction side, which is very technical. So,
but I think from the early stages of design, it's important to think about the narrative.
Yeah. I think the narrative has to be thought about throughout the entire design process. So even when we are looking at a floor plan, which in a sense is a way of thinking where you are critiquing and creating the kind of the framework for the house, right? At that kind of level, even in that view, we're thinking about narrative. We're thinking about what does it mean to flow from here to there and what to experience and what to see, even in the abstract sense. So I think there's a lot of different tools that we use and a lot of different ways we think about houses and design and buildings. And the narrative is a key one for us that, again, provides the real dimension to what's going to happen, and it kind of permeates through all the other thinking throughout the process.
And so that brings us to the first point, which is basically living patterns, and kind of like what each space is meant to be. It's interesting, again, if you think just about kind of like the standard way of thinking about spaces, you're thinking a bedroom. Well, a bedroom is just a place where you sleep, right? Okay, well, if you're trying to use that as kind of like a
seed,
a seed or an ingredient to create a bedroom, it's not going to take you very far.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And if you think about it as like a room is like a set for a movie, right? Mm-hmm. Within the set happens different scenes, right? So if let's say the bedroom is the set and the scene would be sleeping, that's one scene. Mm-hmm. But many scenes can happen within the same set. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it starts to become more interesting, is actually thinking about all of the things that could happen in that bedroom and how those things can inform the design or the creation of what that bedroom wants to be. Right? Is it for sleeping? Is it for reading a book? Is it a place where you watch movies? Is it a place where you cuddle? Is it a place where, I don't know, all of your dogs are sleeping with you in your bed? Or, you know what I mean? Like all of those, because everybody lives differently. We each have our little ritual, our own sensibilities within our everyday life. And I think it's kind of interesting to pick up on like everybody's routine and moments and the small things that makes you different from the person that lives next to you, right? Like how you use your bedroom, what time do you wake up, what are the things that you enjoy? You enjoy the sound of the curtains opening in the morning or the smell of coffee getting in the bedroom, and how we can as professionals kind of like pick up on that and really embrace it and kind of like blow it up to become something that actually makes your bedroom your bedroom.
Yeah, and I like the analogy to creating movies and films, because there is this idea in filmmaking that every scene should be driving the story forward and should be conveying something to the audience. And the set, as you put it, is just a vehicle. It's just an armature. It's a set that allows things to happen. And I like the idea of you mentioned bedroom, because I feel like it's oftentimes one of the rooms that's, especially the secondary bedrooms, it's not really thought about. It's kind of like, okay, well, we have to have 3 bedrooms in addition to the primary. Okay, so we have 3 bedrooms, they're each 12 by 12, 15 by 15, whatever size. They're sort of rectangular. Here's the bed. We have enough feet between the bed and then the credenza, but enough feet between the bed and the closets you can open the doors, and there's a window. And as you said, here's the stuff, and then, okay, we're good. We've checked off the box, and we have a bed. But it's not really a bedroom. It's just a room with a bed in it, right? And I think when we start to unpack all of those things, then we can think, okay, well, is this room maybe more about rejuvenation, or is it about security, or maybe it's both? If it's about rejuvenation and peacefulness, maybe there should be a skylight so we can look at the stars at night, or a window so we're looking at the forest, or we want to face a certain orientation so the sunlight in the morning hits you as a way to wake you up. And so I like the movie analogy because it seems to be a way to understand what we do. And it's also like in a movie, if you have a scene that's been constructed, but the scene's not doing anything for the plot, then the scene doesn't belong, right? And we want to do the same thing in architecture. We want to make sure that if we are putting in a room, it's not just there because it adds to the bedroom count. It needs to do something for the experience of the entire house.
That's why it becomes really interesting, and that's also where it can really enhance the client's lifestyle and that they had, or really change the lifestyle that they used to have to something that's much better. And I think it goes back to thinking about the quality of those scenes and those sets as their impact on the character. If you look at movies, sometimes actors are acting extremely well, or they improvise and just find something at the moment because they were in that setting making that scene, and they just felt like, really one with the character, right?
Yeah.
And you can imagine if you live in a house that's been designed for you and has been so well thought out that that could potentially make you live like 200% better.
Yeah. There's this relationship between the set or the room or the architecture and the people within it, right? And you want that relationship to be a positive one. So the design of a home, or a room in this case, should allow for certain things to happen, yes, but should also promote specific things based on who's using it. And I think that relationship is super important. So we don't ever really think about, we never just think about a design of a room or entire house as just being an object that's there. You always think about it in relationship to how it's affecting the characters or the people in the space.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like if you're coming home from work, you open your front door. If at the moment you enter your home, there is the space has the power to make you feel like everything else doesn't matter. Like everything that happened at work is left, outside the door. And once you came in, you're like transported to, your own cocoon, right? Your own place. And imagine the traveling camera going from the entry of the house where you drop your keys, your stuff, you kind of like let go of your work self, and then go in the kitchen. It's a beautiful space. You enjoy making a beautiful meal. You enjoy it. You only have like 2 hours at night because you have a busy schedule, but every single experience you have in those spaces makes you feel amazing. I think it's kind of, like some people might be like, whoa, yeah, sure. Like what, like what is that? I don't really believe in it or whatever. I think it's underrated, the impact that spaces and special moments the impact that they could have on your life and how they could make you feel.
What's interesting about architecture and design for most people is that it is a very passively experienced thing, right? But I also don't think that a space has to be more obvious in order for it to be impactful, right? It can be passive and be influential at the same time.
Yeah.
It can be quiet and be influential. So when we talk about living patterns and the purpose of each spaces, that's in a lot of ways kind of the fundamentals of where we start. Like one of the ways that I'm always thinking about the building design is kind of like a comic book strip. If I imagine a comic book strip, and each of the frames in the strip is an action and activity that the person who's living in the house or occupying the library or whatever building type is doing. And that allows me to kind of think about, again, it gives me a different way to see the project, right? A very personal way to see the project, a very realistic way on how to see the project. And that information, which has nothing really necessarily to do with the color of the wall at the beginning of the project, it provides a lot of material to work with.
Yeah.
Right.
The next point, I think, is about thinking of a home as made with sequences and processions. So if you think about it, right, in a house, there is always like kind of like the bigger set. Right, there is the living room, there is maybe the kitchen and the bathroom, let's say like the three main sets of a house. But in between them, there is those like kind of like secondary sets that are as important or even sometimes I wouldn't say more important, but they're crucial in making the existence of the bigger set work with each other, right? So if we look again at, let's say, the living space, well, if you come in a house and there is no entrance, no procession, you go from like, the threshold of your front porch, step a foot inside into your living room, and you're in the middle of the room with the sofa, the TV, and whatever. There's no transition from the exterior to the interior. You just kind of like almost like teleported, like dropped into that space, and when that and it gives you kind of an awkward feeling, and there is an awkward feeling because basically there is a secondary space missing there. And some people could say that it's more of a formal way of thinking of, or let's say an entryway, right? Like you kind of have those different layers of spaces before you get to the living room. Yeah. And I don't know that it has to go with formality. I think it just has to go with the expansion of that procession and preparing you and transitioning. And I think those are spaces that are oftentimes overlooked and underrated in their importance in a house.
I agree.
Because probably most of the budgets, let's say, of construction and design goes toward the bigger set in
I would
a
say
home,
it's oversight from the architects.
which I understand, but you can make very efficient secondary spaces exist without over-designing them. In the same time, if you have too many of them, let's say you have like many hallways to get from your bedrooms and your bathroom, and like it's this kind of like maze-like floor plan, that's terrible because it's just disjointing all of the sets from each other. And oftentimes it's detrimental to them.
One of the most obvious common ways that we know a house is not well designed, because we see a lot of houses, is the transition spaces, right? They're not thought about, as you said. But again, if we think about how does one actually live in a house, how does one actually experience a building, it is through time and through a sequence of spaces. So as much as we focus on the internal aspects of, let's say, a bedroom, as we were talking about, we always think about it as one chapter, one scene in a chapter, and that chapter is part of a larger story. So you have these linkages between different spaces. Yeah. There's always these long sequences, sometimes short sequences, that overlap throughout the experience of the house. And a procession sounds formal, but that is, in fact, it's a commonly used word in architecture to think about it, right? What does it mean to go through these things? And that's really a lot of times the essence of the house. If you don't have that, nothing else works. Like a quick example is, I don't know how many homes I've been in where there's a hallway. The hallway is like 3.5, 4 feet, 5 feet wide, whatever width, standard hallway width. And there's rooms on either side of the hallway going down and bing, 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 bing. And I walk through the house with the client who's thinking about doing a remodel or whatever it is. And they're like, yeah, it just doesn't feel good. I'm like, it doesn't feel good because whoever created this thing, they did not think about the living experience as a larger sequence. It's the same thing as when you see a movie and it feels choppy, it doesn't feel great. It's because you go from, so now he's eating chips, now he's in the cafe, now he's at home, now he's at the library. And there's no purpose or meaning behind those transitions.
Or it could be like if, again, you have like your main set and it's like a continuous shot, right? And you take the camera in the back of the set, that the things that you're not supposed to see, to get to the next one, right?
Wait, what?
Well, when you have like continuous shot in movies and TV shows and stuff, like the camera just keeps following the person who's walking, right? Well, imagine when a house has a bunch of hallways like this. You have your main sets, your kitchen, bathroom, and bath and whatever, right? Living room, and you're trying to go between, like, from one to the other. And you can imagine that the hallway is kind of like the space between the sets, in like a giant warehouse, like a Hollywood warehouse, right? Yeah. You have the kitchen set over there, the bathroom set over there, and you're doing that continuous shot, but you're seeing behind the studs of the set, like you're seeing the staff, like you're seeing the stuff you're not supposed to see. Like that's not what, you're not supposed to be experiencing that, right?
Yeah. That's the mistake that I see very often too, is I think it's very easy for people to think that hallways, this applies to staircases and foyers, obviously, but especially hallways. They're just secondary. They're just there. So you never want to have a space in a house where it's just there because it needs to be. And that's often the hallway, right? The hallway exists just because I need a way to get to the bedroom. That's the only purpose of the hallway. That's when you know it's not good design. Again, like I was saying before, every space and every set, and a hallway is included in that, it has to be doing something.
Yeah.
If it's not, then it doesn't belong or it's been under-designed.
The other thing, because we talk a lot about like interior type of experience, but I also want to make sure that we cover the more exterior aspect of buildings, because there is as much processions there in sequence as there is on the interior.
Especially in California.
Yeah, and one of my, again, biggest pet peeve is that the procession from the street to the house to the front door is way overlooked, underthought, or however you want to put it. But it is probably the biggest one that should be thought of. And especially here in the US, where everybody oftentimes, you have your car, you put in front of your house, and either you go through the garage or you put your car inside the garage and get in your house, or you walk around. But what is that experience?
Mm-hmm.
What is that experience like? Like the relationship from when you get off your car to when you get inside your house. And it really makes me sad when I hear people that say, "Oh, I enter my house through the garage." Okay, so let's look at this vignette for a minute. Let's look at this set and this scene for a minute. Yeah. So you get out of your big SUV, you shut the door, lock your car, turn around. What light is on? It's probably the garage door light that's on above you. Nothing glamorous there. It's there because it's probably required by the garage system company. The law, but that's not a light that anybody designed or really wants to have. Then you make your way through that very, unexciting, boring door that separates the garage to the house, right? Like the juicy part of the set. What do you walk by? You walk by your tools, your broom, your washer and dryer, some dirty rags, The
floor is going to be concrete. And usually there's like 2 concrete steps to get up into the door, which is a sad-looking typical 3 by 6'8" door with a door.
And then you open that door. That door is transporting you to the next dimension.
The next dimension. Yeah.
And the next dimension and the separation between the two, the transition is inexistent. It's just you going over the threshold of that door into, the kitchen or like some abandoned, haunted hallway that's behind the kitchen, between the closet and the kitchen and the powder room, a space that nobody ever put any effort into it. Yeah. And that's how you enter your house. Yeah. And to me, what are we doing? Yeah. It's just like there should be a way to make it more exciting, to make it more proper. And you should be using your garage for your car because that's what it was designed for. But that procession, that 2-3 minute procession, it's like you're taking the back entrance of a building.
It could be easily argued, especially in California, that entry, the garage door entry to the house, is in fact more important than the main entry because it's the one that, for the average person, that's what they use to get in. And yet it's something that's not really thought about. And it's something you certainly don't see in terms of design excellence in the majority of houses, right? And it goes back, again, this feeds directly back into why we think about houses this way. Because we don't want that, right? On the end of the day, also, you want to do what makes sense. Well, just think about how you live. No. Track from 6 a.m., 6:30, 7 a.m., 7:30, all the way throughout. What do you see and what do you do, right? That it should feel great. It should have dimension to that experience. It shouldn't have things that are behind the sets, as you put it, which is basic. It's funny. I was laughing because that garage experience, that is exactly behind the set.
You're seeing behind the studs of that, the kitchen in Friends. You're seeing behind there. Yeah. You're not supposed to see behind there.
Yeah. And I think also that it is a classic mistake that clients, but also a lot of professionals make where they hyper focus on the room. And I see this especially with folks who do a lot of interiors work. It's very easy to be fixated on the room itself, bounded within those 4 walls, or if the room's a weird shape, the 3 walls, or whatever, how many walls, bounded within that space. We focus on that, but that's not how it works, right? It's the same thing when you're going on vacation and you're experiencing this trip and you're going to visit. In our case, we go to visit buildings. You're going to visit the building, right? The building itself is one thing, but what determines the quality of the vacation and the experience is not that one thing. It's not that one Instagram photo, right? It's not that one scene. It's everything getting up to it and then back out of it again.
And you know, when we do like remodel projects, for example, that's often the biggest issue. It's not so much, you know, the finishes are outdated and the appliances are like there is new ones, and that's just time. Like there is nothing that anyone could design that would last 80, 90, 100 years to that level, right? Because just trends and things change. But a lot of the issues that we see with the remodel project is that problem, is that the energy, the focus, and the money was onto that one specific thing. And the things that actually make that space not work is the connection to everything else that ties into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in our office, what this means is that when we were thinking about long strand sequences of experience, we are doing that through 3D modeling. So we have a full computer digital model of the house that we're designing and working on, and we stick the little person in there, and they have an eyesight that's set at 5'5", or sometimes we have clients who are like much taller and shorter. We set it to the approximate eyesight. We've asked clients, can you measure to tell us where eyesight level is? So then when we're moving through the house, we're seeing exactly what you're going to see. And we set it in there, and we move through the house as if we're a person. And we do a lot of other things too. We don't just design that one way, but we do that. So we see, okay, when we turn the corner, this is what we're going to feel. This is what we're going to be exposed to. And then we shift this way, and now we're exposed to that thing. But there's a dead spot, and we need to figure out what this dead spot means. And we're not saying that every space needs to have a fat chandelier in it. Not every space needs to be the main scene. That's not the purpose of all the spaces, but it's about, again, having intention behind how all these things relate.
Yeah, and that actually ties nicely into the third point, which is moments, right? The sequence and procession should be made to lead you to those special moments in a house.
Yep. And now let's give a shout out to our sponsors who support our show.
We are supported by Enscape, which is a fast and easy to use real-time visualization and VR tool for the AEC industry. Enscape is not a standalone application. Instead, it's a plugin which makes things much easier. It plugs into Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, Archicad, and Vectorworks. And with Enscape, you can create realistic renderings, 360-degree panoramas, and videos. You can also immerse clients into VR to give them a deeper understanding of their building. Enscape is used by more than 500,000 monthly users worldwide from over 150 countries. So if you want a fast and user-friendly real-time visualization experience, click on the Enscape 3D link in our show notes.
Say goodbye to design-unfriendly spreadsheets. Programma, built by designers for designers, provides an integrated suite of tools for every phase of your project. From mood boards to advanced specification tools to project management. Seamlessly integrated, easily shareable, and always current, Programma reduces redundancy and minimizes costly errors. Share your work in the format that works for you, be it PDF spec sheets or online branded client dashboards with always up-to-date specification details. Join Interior Design movers and shakers and start for free by clicking the Programma link in our show notes. Experience the difference with Programma, software built for interior design workflows. If you're still using separate 2D and 3D computer programs in your office, then stop that. Get with the times and advance to a BIM computer program, and we recommend Archicad. Archicad leads the industry by enabling architectural and interior design firms around the world to freely design, supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. Archicad continually evolves with technological advances, allowing architects to push that technology to their advantage while working in an accurate model. Start your free, fully functioning trial today by clicking on the Archicad link in our show notes. And those moments can vary. Sometimes it's a perfectly framed view to a thing that's outside. Sometimes it's a sculpture at the end of a hallway. Sometimes it's an entire space that just is done immaculately. What's interesting from a design process perspective, like a moment ago I was talking about designing in 3D and looking at it from a 5'5" kind of eye level, moving through that way. But when it comes to constructing specific moments that just have to be beautiful, working in a traditional elevation view is critical. It's critical. So I think the mistake is to do one or the other, to do the 3D immersive view or to do looking at a snapshot. You need to do both.
Yeah.
Because through that snapshot, through the elevation, which is the side view of a outside of a wall or a side view of whatever, that's how you construct something that is a definable moment, right? But that's not enough, because if you only did that, then you'd have like a sort of like a furniture showroom or like IKEA that has a bunch of miniature sets next to each other. Like, yeah, sure, as the sets, as a one photograph of each room, it looks cool, but as a collective, it makes no sense at all. So you need to have both.
Well, and that's why I think, media also is kind of misleading people, because media in architecture and design has a tendency to focus on only showing those big moments. Mm-hmm. And you rarely get the traveling camera from one space to the next showing you the procession. And really, that's how architecture is experienced, and that's how you judge good architecture, is that procession. If the procession is amazing, mm-hmm. the architecture is going to move you. Yep. You're going to feel something, yep. right? If there is none of that, the moment is what's going to make you feel something, and the moments might be good, but it might not mean that the whole house is good. Yeah,
I agree. And the fourth point, which is a little bit different from the things we've been talking about so far, is how do we create coherency and cohesiveness throughout the narrative?
Yeah, and it's very interesting to think about those aspects of like what we do. Back to the movie analogy, right? If you look at the movie and movie styles, and you can think of like, let's say, Tim Burton or Wes Anderson, they have a very specific style, and the whole movie embraces that style.
Yeah, and I think one way to solve the issue of achieving cohesiveness is just to use the same two materials throughout the entire house, or make the entire house white, right?
Well, and sometimes, that's a safe way.
And I think sometimes that's very effective, and I think that's very interesting. But you don't have to do that in order to have a house feel like it's being honest to whatever the statement is being made. And that statement needs to be clear as a whole thing, as a whole house. And but there are many ways to do that. It could be through form, it could be through geometry, it could be through materials, which is often. It could be done through the fenestration or the windows. How we puncture the structure to let light in could be the way that provides enough of a continuous thread so that the house is saying something complete. There's a lot of ways to do it. I think that I'm not discrediting the houses that are all white or houses that have only a very restrained material palette, because we've done ones that have those. But there are many other ways to think about that problem without it being so kind of like obvious.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to who the client is.
Sure.
And what they want the narrative to be like, to feel like. We've had clients who only do black and whites. Mm-hmm. Like no colors. Mm-hmm. We have clients who like very light tones everywhere, because mm-hmm. they want to feel relaxed. They want to feel like not, oppressed mm-hmm. by the spaces, not cluttered. Mm-hmm. We have clients who want really bright colors because they want to feel excited everywhere they go in their house. We want clients who want all of that, right? Depending on the spaces, because for them, it just transports them into different moods and different feelings.
As you were talking, I was just thinking about a project that's ongoing. And one of the ways that we've created this consistency throughout the project, or coherency, is actually nothing to do with anything visual, which is kind of a strange thought. It has to do with how you move. So in the project, it's a house. It's on a site that's fairly large. And there's a lot of architectural elements that engage with the site. So there are walls that stick out into the property. There's fences, there's screens. There's like all these elements that we're using, decks and stuff like that. And we have created a repeating way of moving where there are walls that very gently block views that we don't want people to see into private spaces, or views that block unsightly things. And you move across the walls in a certain way and then around the walls, and you see through them sometimes. I know it's very abstract in a podcast to describe that, but it's an example of, and we have that throughout the project. And even inside, there's that. And I remember there was a moment we were designing something that's inside the house, this element. We had all these different options. And some of the options had the same exact materials as throughout the rest of the project. So on paper, right, maybe to the untrained eye, it's like, well, you have stone and that's the same stone as out there. So like now it matches, right? It works. And we just felt internally as we were working on it, this doesn't feel right. And it's because this thing that we were designing didn't have the same conceptual movement that would allow a person to do around the thing as it did around the rest of the property. And once we recognized that, we're like, that's it. We forgot that in the design, we've created this story that has to do, and the consistency is how one moves throughout the property. And now we've introduced this thing that even though the palette matches everything else, it doesn't belong.
Well, that's what, I'm thinking, like, for example, Breaking Bad, the TV show. Right? They have a certain color palette that they use. They have a certain music that they use. And then they have a certain types of like cuts that they do on the scenes, right? So even if the colors are the same, let's say for us, like the materials are the same, but they do a bunch of like different cuts that just doesn't match from episodes to episodes, it's not gonna feel like it's theirs. If they have their own, like they have some like pretty interesting way of shooting some scenes,
angles
and like a plain depth of field and stuff like that, like, and you can tell that's like now I'm watching other TV shows, like, oh, that's a Breaking Bad way of shooting, because they're kind of like the first ones to do that or whatever. But I think it goes back to, it's not because you're satisfying one way of doing things in the project that it's automatically going to work. And that's where, we come into play. It's how do we massage those things to make it feel right for the project.
Yeah, and that
it's not just as simple as just apply it everywhere and it's going to work.
Yeah, and that is one of the biggest differences, I think, one of the biggest value adds that we would bring, or an architect or designer would bring, who's good. And that's also the difference between, I would say, like a good architect and a not good one, or a good designer and a bad one. I don't know how many times I've seen, professionals say, okay, well, we're going to start the project and we want it to all feel like it's, been designed together and it's holistic design. So let's establish a palette. And this is our palette. And yes, 90% of the time does that happen in projects? And does that help the project feel like it's a holistic design? Yes. But to say that's the default is ridiculous. There's so many other ways to have consistency in a narrative and have continuity in it. And I think that's really the thing here too, right? And it's as you said, it's a common mistake to be like, okay, well, we have kind of vertical lines that are happening in some way. Maybe it's a pattern, maybe it's a wallpaper, maybe it's actual building, whatever. We have verticalness. Okay, we'll just put verticalness everywhere else.
Right.
It's like, that is a dumb way of viewing about it. That's a superficial way of thinking about it, right? There's always another dimension and angle conceptually to what a thing is, and that can be used as a way to understand everything else. Like I was saying, moving. Like, who thinks about moving around screens and walls and views like that as being the thing? Yeah. But it can very much be the thing.
The next point is thinking about a house as something that is dynamic, like a song, right? If you think about designing a house as like one tone, like one note, it's gonna be. I mean, look, it could be pretty interesting actually, but that's gonna be pretty boring. The analogy of a song and music as a way of thinking about design, interior design, and architecture is very interesting because that encompasses a lot of different things, like the breaks, the elongation of notes, the repetition, the ups and the downs, the louds and the quiets, the silence, the themes, the difference of sounds.
Yeah, the tightness, the looseness, the rawness, the flatness. I mean, as people might know, I have a background in music. I was not a professional, like not even close to that, but I did play music for many years. It was my passion before architecture. I loved it despite me being not the greatest at it. But I was good enough to where I got to experience what it meant to perform as a soloist and as a part of a small ensemble of 12 people, as part of an ensemble of 70 and 150. And I wish I could convey to people who have not been in ensembles what it's like to be part of that experience, because there's so many dimensions. You mentioned a lot of them, but there's so many dimensions to that performance that you just feel and you know it to be true, and everyone else around you feels it too. And So when I think about music and songs, I think about architecture in the same way. And I'm not saying that a house cannot be austere, all white, and kind of like the same note repeated in a sense. Like it can be that. But I personally also think houses should have a certain amount of dynamism to them. So there should be compression and expansion and the things that happen, because that's kind of reflective of life. And I think that's what keeps houses interesting and engaging and meaningful over a longer period of time, rather than it just being a white arches, white arch, white arch, white arch. Okay, cool. It looks good and we're done. I think there's more to it than that. And I think there's more to what it means to live in a house than that. So I really like, the compression expansion. His example is, and this is a move that became famous because of Frank Lloyd Wright, but he didn't invent it, is that when you enter a space, the first transition space to get to the main space is low. So Frank Lloyd Wright would do this thing, and a lot of architects do this. You drop the ceiling to a height that by today's standards would be considered abnormal, like 7 foot high, right? And you're in this space, and you would say, well, that's stupid. I don't want a 7 foot high ceiling. But you're not sitting in the space. It's your transition. So there's compression. And then when you get to the next space, like 5 feet later, there's expansion to the actual ceiling height, which might only be 10 feet. But guess what? Because of that relationship, now the 10 feet feels significantly different, right? Yeah. And so that's the other thing, too, I think, when we think about especially the time of the narrative, is as like a song has all these kind of ebbs and flows and themes to it, and we break the theme here. We have a hard pause, a break, and a crescendo. These things should happen in a house.
And that's why also, to me, there is the kind of like standard design, and then there is like upper tier. Is that it takes a lot to master and own those skills of doing those more complex approach. It doesn't mean that it's like cluttered and busy and over designed. It just means like it takes a lot more thinking and creation in playing with all of those different notions of and all of these different tools available than just using the same 3 over and over on every project.
Yeah, 100%. And just again, repeat, like all songs have a sort of like reoccur. I don't know what the term is in music, but there's a theme or a reoccurring theme that happens throughout a song or an orchestral piece, right? But it's not like you just repeat it over and over again and the problem is solved. You break it and you do different things to it. I mean, I don't know. You ever go on Behance and see like all the kind of luxury stuff? It's like all the same stuff, right? And you can guarantee that if that Behance designer were to design a whole house, it'd be the same kind of thing, just recycled. But that's not enough, right? That's like saying it's like taking the same lick in a song and just repeating it a bunch of times and saying, well, it all matches each other, so we're good. No, I don't think so.
Yeah. All right, what is number 6?
So the number 6 is emotion, which I want to say is a very interesting subject for us to talk about, because folks might not know this, but in my experience, architects and in architecture school and in the profession, the emotional impact our designs have on people is actually not thought about or talked about nearly as much as I think it should be. And I think it's because, going back to the very beginning of the conversation, it's very easy for architects to be focused on all of the 1,000 things we need to do, like the floor plans, like the analytical stuff, the programming, the building science, all of these things they have to get done. And they're just as crucial, no doubt. But as a result, I do find that it can be easy to get locked into this kind of very pragmatic way of thinking. Like, okay, we have this line, that line continues all the way across, and because this is a very important line, this datum, this reveal in the project, it must continue, and this line intersects. Okay, and when you think that way, as one has to, you kind of forget. Okay, but wait, what does it feel like to be in the space, and what is this? How does this make a person feel? Just how does it make them feel, right? And this is also where in larger projects you get into the conversation of different cultures and understanding the people in that city or town or part of the world. True. You can't predict how everyone's going to feel. However, in the case of houses, we know our clients very well. we try to understand them very well. So we know how they're going to respond to the things we're producing emotionally. We know, like, and not just a matter of, oh, they're not going to like this, but this is going to make them feel a certain way, uneasy, happy, sad, relaxed, et cetera, et cetera. And there's certain definitely characteristics that are shared amongst most people anyway. But the emotional impact that a wall or a furniture piece or an elevation or whatever has on somebody is obviously a big part of what it means to create a narrative and what it means to create architecture in a house.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because emotions in a project often comes only at the end, when the final product is done. And hopefully it's good emotion. But it's interesting to think and wanting to design with the emotions in mind. Mm-hmm. Like, again, if you're thinking about the sets as wanting to make you feel one way or the other, it's going to inform so much of the design choices to accomplish that, right? Mm-hmm. You can make a space feel very like intimate, private, and secret if it's like yellow, right?
Like, generally, it
might be a bit complicated because that is just that your emotion to yellow is not. Your emotional response to yellow isn't one that feels like intimate, private, and secret. Yeah. Right? It's loud.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. I think it's hard to teach or talk about because it's very personal. It's very elusive. It's very abstract. It's not data driven or scientific. It's much more on the poetic level of things.
Yeah, I think the poetry of architecture is something that has just been overlooked.
But I think it goes back maybe more toward art and the emotion that art, provoke on people.
Do you think your background in that helps you? The background in kind of like the sculpture, the sketching, and this kind of thing, like it brings a different dimension to.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think so. I think it's also a personal thing. Like, if you're a person who questions things and think about things philosophically all the time, it's very different than if you're very rational and data and scientifically driven. Even if you've studied arts, like maybe it's more of a personality and interest. But yeah, I think having studied arts and paintings and the interpretation of, let's say like classical paintings and the meaning of things and, having grown up going to museums and seeing things like you understand your emotions a little bit better. You're a bit more aware of emotions.
Yeah. That's the final point. So we're wrapping up the conversation, but that's also where when we work with clients who have some kind of creative background, it's very interesting and it's very different because they just get it. They see it and they feel it. The same thing as a musician. You just feel it, whether or not it's right or wrong. And we can dissect it and talk about it all day as we do on the show, because there are mechanics, there is the science as to why something feels one way or the another in music, film, and in architecture. But it tends to be that the clients who have that background, or they're just really interested in the arts, they have extensive photography collections or something, right? It's enough. It's more than enough for them to have a very finely tuned kind of sensibility.
Yeah.
It tends to be also we show them options and they're like, boom, that's it. We're like, yep, that was the best one we like too. On to the next.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're a creative person, find us.
Thanks everybody for listening to this Project Companion episode. If you like what we do, please support the show. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and many other platforms we're on. If you have questions, topics you want us to talk about, or guest suggestion, you can call or text the hotline 213-222-6950. And what else? We have
you can find our office online on Instagram and also everywhere else as well, Fame Architecture and Design. Hit us up for any questions or suggestions for topics, as you said. We're always looking for suggestions. Things to talk about, right?
Yeah, if you're about to embark on an architectural or interior design project and you have questions, this is the platform to ask them.
Yeah, I agree. Because also we spend a lot of time in our office in the show trying to think about what clients think about. That it's becoming increasingly harder, right? Because after like 13 years of experience, you just know what you do so well, and you don't it's hard to step outside of our shoes.
Right.
So yes, if anyone who's like not a designer and architect, or you are one and you have something in mind, then reach out to us.
Yep.
Thanks and talk soon.
Bye-bye.